Welcome back to another video. It's Aidan here from Bespoke Coachworks. This time around we're going to be making a door skin for the Rolls Royce. So I did start out with a paper pattern, although the paper pattern on this for this particular panel was just a very basic one just to get our piece size. There's no details or anything like that laid out to this point, so all it is just a low crayon. So very basic paper pattern, so I didn't show it because it's purely just get my piece size and that's it. So starting off, we're just wheeling. I've got a very low crown in there at the moment. It's got a 48-inch radius. So all I'm doing is starting by cross wheeling. I like to do majority of my wheeling in a cross direction. I find it's better to develop an even surface where the panel doesn't want to dive in different directions. So I'll start off with crossing both ways to develop the first sort of area, the first part of the shape, and then from then on you can do refinements by going long ways down the panel or up and down the panel, but I always prefer to start with moving in a crosshatch pattern. So quite a big door skin, so a lot of work needs to be done to try and support the panel to make sure it's not diving as you wheel, holding it up, keeping it nice and level so you're not getting any shoulders in the panel. Also too, with this particular door skin, it has more shape than what the original body had, but there's still not a lot of shape in this skin. So being very careful, very light pressure, not to add too much crown into the piece. Later on in this video we will be going over I'll be doing the feature line for the door, as well as turning the top radius as well. So those parts will come in later. That's why I've got all the extra material on there. But at the moment we just want to develop that low crown. Something to take note of at the moment is a good view. When you're working on a big skin or a big panel, you want to be mindful of the way that you're moving through the panel. You don't want to be walking where your feet are, your both feet are like raising off the ground and walking through the panel. You want to sort of get into a rhythm where you can rock off one foot and pivot off one foot. I find as you walk, your hips articulate, making your hands and your shoulders wanting to raise as you walk. Where if you were to get yourself into a nice, comfortable position where you're able just to rock off one foot, you're able to better stabilize your hands, which is important in trying to get get that nice surface finish and not sort of getting any shoulders. You can see there, I'm just rocking off my foot to let my body go back and forward. Even when you have a bigger panel again, or if I was to rotate that panel 90 degrees, I think, there we go, I'm about to do it now. So you can see I got into a rhythm just there where I'm just rocking off that one foot instead of walking both the feet. The more comfortable you get, the more competent you get with a wheel, you could walk, but I find it easier just to rock off your foot like this. So you can see that I'm on my final sort of refining now because I'm only sort of doing small sections. I'm not going through and shaping over the entire panel. I'm going in, wheeling certain areas that I think might need a little bit extra, so there's a little bit more of an acceleration across the top, a little bit more of acceleration across the front of the door skin. So I'm just going in and working those areas a little bit more. So obviously getting very close to having my final shape that I'm happy with, and then we'll be, moving on to adding in the feature lines, things like that. So just, you can see I'm sort of using the light to see any sort of small, high or low spots. Coming back in, small adjustment of pressure just to try and work those areas. You could see there that I must have had a small low spot because I've done sort of like a small medium higher pass to try and blend that area. So small, a little bit bigger, medium, and then doing a full pass, doing it again. Small passes, medium passes, big passes to raise that area. A little bit more. Now fitting onto the car. You can see just quickly, just looking at my reflection, that the surface is nice. There's not any sort of major discrepancy. Even looking through, how the panel is sitting over the quarter panel. You can see also too that there's not a lot of, there's no discrepancy in the highlight lines or the reflection. It all seems quite nice. So just fitting to the wireframe, see if I'm happy with the overall sort of flow of the panel. Just checking it against my wireframe. Just need another clamp there for the bottom. Overall, I think I'm pretty happy with the shape there. As I mentioned, it's not a massive crown. It is quite low, but it is higher than what the original was, and it's just enough to give it that sweep through the entire body. You can just see I'm sort of going back and checking areas, walking and looking at the panel from all different angles to sort of see if I'm noticing any light in other parts. It's always nice to, when you're doing something to this sort of scale, it's always nice to have space in your shop around the car where you can sort of get back and look at it from multiple angles, high, low, stepped back, different lengths. It's always nice. I find it's always nice to just take a photo of your work and see how it presents. So moving on here now, you can see I've got the red line. That's my proposed line for my feature line. The top being the rollover of the door, and then the bottom being the joggle. Now I have the blue line there, and the blue line there is 18mm tape. So that is what I'm going to use as my offset for my guide that I'm about to put onto the door. So at the moment there, I've just got a 90-degree angle, and I'm just going back and forth from the shrinker and stretcher, fitting that 90-degree angle to my panel, because that is going to be my offset. A little trick that I like to use is when I make my tooling, particularly for offset tooling, something I know that I'm going to use as an offset, I will set it up with an 18mm offset. The reason why I use 18mm is because that's one of the most common tape sizes that you can buy. So it just speeds up the process instead of measuring something out, using something that's repeatable. So got the tooling set up there now, and I'm just running through the power hammer. This is just a reciprocating machine, so just running through light pass to create the first sort of step. Adjusting the distance up now. I'm using nylon dies, so just a plastic die, not to mar the material too much. And with aluminium, they hold up really well. So if this was a steel panel, I'd be using a steel die, but with the aluminium, I like to use a plastic die. So I've slowed this down to, the first pass was in a sped up version. I've slowed this one down to real time, just so you can see the speed that I'm going through. You don't want to move too fast, because you want the hammer to be hitting as much as it can, so keeping those hammer strokes really close together. That way you're not going to have a real sort of jittery pattern on your line. Trying to stay steady, and the same thing, important not to try and walk too much when you're in the hammer as much as possible. You could see there I just done I was just joking around that I sort of leant backwards because I didn't want to take that extra step, so I was just sort of holding it and kind of was doing the limbo to keep the panel steady. So removing the guide, just do a bit of a close-up here to see that line, and then you can see I've still got the Sharpie line on top, and that's where I'm going to start to radius that panel over. So I've got it fitting to the car, seeing where I'm happy once again, looking at the reflections, they're all nice. And now we want to roll over that top edge. So I've just got a radius in the, like a radius T dolly, and now I'm just using a plastic mallet to hammer over that line, using plastic so I don't, once again, don't mar the material too much, and it just allows me to establish that line without doing sort of any major damage. If you slightly hammer it and get that highlight in the wrong spot, you can go back in and adjust. So just hammering that over. It's important to note that when you do hammer that over, the panel is going to want to straighten. So later on, I will have to go back in and do some shrinking across that top edge, but then also too, the way that I have that panel marked at the front, there is a bit of a sweep upwards. So that means I'm going to have to create more material, otherwise it will bend over too much. So I'll have to do some linear stretching to being in a reverse curve to allow that material to roll over. I always like to put radiuses and things like that in afterwards. If I went in and put that in first, that would lock a lot of the panel in, and it would trap a lot of, so when I'm done wheeling and things like that, it would trap a lot of the shape in. I always prefer to, my sort of method of doing things is always do shaping functions first, do your forming last. So you're doing shaping first, then you're putting in bead details and things like that after you've already done all your shaping and you're happy with the panel fit, and then you're doing things like flanges. And I class this top radius basically like a flange. It's a big shape that locks in a lot of the panel. If I'd done that first, or I'd done my bead line first and then tried to wheel it, it would be not as nice to try and get that bead to, one, take the shape of the panel, but then also you run the risk of trapping shape in, not being able to release an edge if you were to shape it too much or anything like that. So that's why flanging and things like that should always be done last. See, I'm getting close to that reverse curve area. So moving over to the power hammer, linear stretch die in the top. I've got a radius on the bottom. From memory, it's probably like a 24-inch radius on the bottom, and just creating extra material to sort of pull that reverse curve section over. Doesn't need a lot, but definitely need to do some to be able to pull it over. Now that that's all stretched, I can go back in, hammering with the mallet to pull that all the way around. I would have gone through already and done a quick kick shrink across the top, which you can see there is a couple of marks there from the kick shrinker, so you can tell that I've already gone in and just given that a light bump, fitting the car nicely. So now it's just a matter of cleaning up the hammer marks with just a hammer and dolly. Allows you sort of pull the, adjust the top angle over how you like, and hammering out any of those areas that you want to adjust. It's obviously when you're holding a big panel and you've only got one hand to sort of hold the panel, one hand to hammer, pull that radius over, there's always going to be areas that aren't as clean. But I find because you've hammered it over with plastic, you haven't done a whole lot of shrinking and stretching. All you're doing is basically inducing form to the panel. So you can hammer that over, then go in and just adjust, taking out any sort of lumps and bumps and discrepancies with the hammer and dolly. It's a good way to sit back and sort of analyze your work. More efficient you get at doing things like that, the less you have to, spend time hammering and dolling things up. This is all just light refining work though, sort of tuning highlight lines, trying to get the highlight lines consistent, feeling over the panel to make sure that there's no sort of major high spots. As I mentioned in my last video about the TIG welding, I don't focus a lot on trying to get the panel absolutely perfect and file finished and things like that. I just focus on getting the highlight lines as nice as possible, making sure there's no major high spots. Anything after that, you can obviously adjust it with high fill or a little bit of filler, provided it's to a level. For me, my acceptable level is if you can sort of finish it off in a Scotch-Brite finish, and you can look at it and you're fairly happy with that, obviously knowing that there's always room for improvement. But if you can look at that and go, yeah, look, I'm pretty stoked with how that finish is in Scotch-Brite, you're doing pretty good. So that's how I like to sort of judge. If I get it to a Scotch-Brite finish and I go, no, that area I'm just not happy with it, that's when I'll adjust. But I just think that's a good point of reference. If I was to go in and just hit it with a 80 grit on an orbital sander, it hides so much, it's hard to tell what's what. So So at this point, I've gone through, I've done all the hammer and dollying. Like in the last video again, I've hit it with the 80 grit on the electric sander just to sort of take off any sort of, take out any of those hammer marks. I've welded up the Cleco holes, and now I'm just going through adjusting with the hammer and dolly and hitting with the 80 grit on the sandpaper to brush it. This will start to really bring up any sort of imperfections. It allows you to go through, adjust where necessary, and then later on I'll finish it off with the Scotch-Brite. But this allows you to, you can block it without taking off like a lot of material like a body file will. So you can go through, you can cross block, block it on all the different, sand it on all the different angles to make sure that you are going over the surface correctly. You can see here just jumping between, adjusting with the hammer and dolly where I need to, very light. You can see I'm holding the hammer quite high. People say it's choking the hammer, but it's just so we're not, hitting the panel too hard. So just finish blocking with the 80 grit, making sure we're happy with how it's all looking. Still more finishing to go, obviously, once flanges get turned and all that sort of thing. So fitment once again, really liking the way that the reflection is across the two overlapped panels. You can see that panel's overlapped 1.6 millimeters, but still the reflection is just really nice through there. So really happy with how the quarter panel and door sort of transition has gone on there. I'm going to cover the bead detail on the quarter panel in an upcoming video. I sort of wanted to get all the door skin out in one go, so I just sort of done a little bit backwards to the actual process that I did, but yeah, better than chopping and changing. At least I could sort of show you the door skin all in one piece. So getting that fitment nice. So overall, really happy with how that's all come along. Yeah, so in this video, we've wheeled up a low crown door skin, put in a feature line, we've turned the top radius, done some hammer and dolly work. And now I'm just marking out based off just the line on the rear, and this is just to go over it with the Scotch-Brite. Obviously this sort of stuff is not essential in any way, but it's just something that when you're doing it for a client, things like that, it's just keeping your work neat for a few extra minutes that it takes you to tape things up and run the Scotch-Brite across it all, so it's all nice and even. It doesn't take much. It's a lot nicer for them to come in and see their car looking like this, as compared to if that was just messy and orbital sanded and not sort of care taken. So just something that I like to do. So once again, we're coming close to the end of the video. Really appreciate you guys following along. I hope the information that I can share in this is helpful. Anything that you guys would like to see improved, please let me know. I am obviously further along in the build than what I'm showing at the moment, so anything that I'm doing now will take a number of weeks to show up in the videos, being that I've filmed so much more content than what I've where I'm up to with these videos. But I do appreciate all the feedback that you guys can provide. Once again, if you can like, just share it, subscribe, all that sort of stuff helps us be able to put out more content. It shows that our videos are getting liked, and it all just helps. So thank you once again, and I'll see you guys next week for another video. Cheers.